Okay. Good evening, everyone. Everyone hear me okay? Yeah? All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a classic Cleveland spring night, whatever that means. We're pleased to have you join us for tonight's program, Aging with a Plan with Professor Sharona Hoffman. And I'll read you her bio in a second, but it's really a pleasure to have a speaker for our program who I'd say is doubly one of our own. Sharona is a faculty member at Case Western Reserve University, but is also a lifelong learner in her own right, in that she has been an avid student of Hebrew here at Siegel for many, many years. So we're just really thrilled that she offered her expertise for our community this evening. Sharona Hoffman is a professor of law with a secondary appointment in the Department of Bioethics. She's the co-director of the Law Medicine Center and holds a BA from Wellesley College and a JD from Harvard Law School and an LLM in health law from the University of Houston. She worked as an associate at a large Los Angeles law firm and as a senior trial attorney at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's Houston office. She teaches civil procedure, employment discrimination, religion, ethics, and the law seminar, healthcare and human rights seminar, and health matrix notes seminar. She's published over 50 articles and book chapters primarily on health and civil rights law. Her research interests include disability discrimination, biomedical research, healthcare coverage, race and medicine, health information technology, and emergency preparedness. Following Sharona's remarks and our Q&A session, her book is available for sale at the back, which she will gladly sign. So please join me in welcoming Sharona Hoffman.
All right, let's see. Can everybody hear? Okay, great. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be on this side of the lectern. Usually I'm attending events here, and they are always great, so I have a high standard to meet. So I thought I would start by telling you a little bit about why I wrote the book, and then we'll get into the substance of it. So the book actually grew out of a very difficult period in my life. During 18 months in 2013 and 2014, both of my parents died, my mother-in-law died, and my husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at the age of 55. So that was a bad couple of years. As I was going through all of this, I learned a lot about the medical, legal, financial, social, and other challenges of getting older and getting sick and ultimately facing death. I am a professor of law and bioethics, so I knew something about the doctrine and theory of a lot of these issues, but there's nothing like personal experience to really enliven your knowledge and drive those lessons home. In the midst of all of this, in July of 2014, I faced a pretty big birthday. When I talk to seniors, they laugh at me, but I turned 50. That was a big deal to me. So I thought it was time to probably start thinking about my own aging and put some plans in place. And I realized that as difficult as things were for our parents, they may well be more difficult for Andy and for me because we don't have children. We don't have anyone who's going to drop everything and rush to our aid when we need it. So life has taught me that it's unpredictable, that as much as I want to control everything, and I do, I can't, and it's full of surprises, and some of them are quite unpleasant. But nevertheless, there's a lot to be gained from thinking ahead, planning ahead, and trying to put some safeguards in place. So the book is first of all my own effort to deal with my own anxieties, which can be quite considerable. But more importantly, it's an effort to put my personal and professional experiences to good use and help others. I'm always asked, who's the audience for this book? And it's really everyone. I think it is very useful to people who are already seniors or already doing the day-to-day work of caregiving. But it's also useful for younger people, people who are middle-aged, who should be thinking about their own aging or in the more immediate future, thinking about caring for elderly loved ones. I also think it's a bit different from a lot of books that are out there. It doesn't focus just on one issue like finances or law. It really tries to hit all of the highlights of issues that I faced. So it goes chapter by chapter, each chapter dedicated to a different topic, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I tried to provide a lot of practical advice. I have checklists. I have some discussion of research and studies to back up my points. I also have a lot of personal anecdotes, so hopefully it's pretty readable. So let's talk about the substance. And first of all, what topics does the book cover? So I start with money matters, with finances, because unfortunately money is relevant to all of the other challenges. So what expenses can you anticipate in retirement? And even if you have very, very good health insurance, you will still have out-of-pocket expenses. And if you need long-term care, assisted living, nursing homes, in-home care, no health insurance covers that. So how do you go about saving for retirement? And what do you need to know about particular fiscal products, such as long-term care insurance and reverse mortgages, which are heavily advertised, but they are actually very, very complicated products, and you really need to be educated about them before making decisions. The benefits of community living. So we hear a lot about aging in place, about staying in the home that you've had for decades, that you really love, and maintaining full independence. And that can be good for a lot of people, but it's only good if you will still be able to have social interaction, if you will have people visiting you, if you'll be able to go out and do things like come here for lectures, if people can check on you in the home to make sure that you're safe. So the risk is, for a lot of people, aging in place becomes socially isolating. And a theme that runs throughout the book is the importance of social interaction. Social interaction has been shown to be associated with better mental health, better physical health, and longevity. So by coming out and doing this, even on a rainy night, you're actually making yourself live longer. By contrast, loneliness is associated with more health problems, cardiovascular problems, higher blood pressure, more insomnia. So a lot of people actually should not be aging in place. They should be considering some kind of community setting, some kind of retirement community. And we're really lucky in Cleveland. We have a lot of choices, independent living. I just visited Wiggins a few weeks ago, and it seemed like a great place. We have Judson, continuing care retirement communities. So lots of choices, and I talk about those in the book. What if you're like me and you don't have people who are going to give you unpaid help with fiscal matters, with getting medical care, with things around the house? So I have a chapter that talks about some emerging service professionals, service industries, daily money managers. Has anybody heard of those? Yeah, not many people have, but they're there. Geriatric care managers, which I think more people have heard about, home organizers, and others. So how do you find these people? How do you hire them? How do you make good choices? Essential legal planning. I'm a law professor, so I will elaborate on this a little bit. Driving while elderly. Driving was a huge issue in my family. It is a very sensitive topic. And I know that it is in a lot of other families as well. And it turns out that the government is not really helpful with this. The government is not good at identifying people who are at risk of not being safe drivers. My mother-in-law, at the age of 92, went to the Massachusetts Department of Motor Vehicles with a walker. And you would think they would see she's 92 and she uses a walker. They would conclude they need to follow up. Maybe her legs don't work, for example. But no, she passed the vision test and they happily gave her a driver's license. Similarly, the authorities are not trained to take driver licenses away. And so I've had relatives who had multiple car accidents, including doing things like driving into fire hydrants that got in their way. And they got a ticket, but nothing further was done. So it's really up to families to intervene, unfortunately, and it is very, very difficult. So I have some advice about how you identify people who are at risk of being unsafe drivers and how you approach very, very difficult conversations with them without having it devolve into threats like, I'm writing you out of my will, I'm moving to another city and not telling you where it is, and how do you avoid anguish in this area. I have a chapter on medical care, care coordination, treating the patient, not diseases, and I will talk a little bit more about that later on. Long-term care. Long-term care is nursing homes, assisted living, in-home care. What do you need to know about those options? How do you make good choices? And in-home care can be quite complicated. So there are agencies, and Cleveland has quite a number, and they provide very good service, but they are very expensive. It's $19 to $20 an hour. I had to figure out with my father that turns into about $175,000 per year. So my sisters and I actually started out after my mother died and he couldn't live alone, we started out hiring somebody from Craigslist, which sounds very risky, but sometimes it's the only affordable choice. And if you do your research, you can use the internet to do background checks, you call references, you interview the person multiple times, you do whatever checking you can, you have someone come and do unannounced visits in the home. It actually worked out beautifully for us. He was a rabbi, so he only wanted a male caregiver, which pretty much eliminates anyone from an agency. And we got really lucky, so it can be done, and sometimes it's the only affordable choice. When his needs became more acute, we did end up switching to a home care agency for the last 4 months of his life, but that was a lot more affordable than doing that for 18 months. And finally, I have a chapter called Exit Strategies, which is about end-of-life decision-making, and I'll say a few more words about that later on. So before we get into a couple of the topics, I thought I would start with some facts and figures. And if you like facts and figures, this is the slide for you. If you don't, it's only one slide and it goes quick. All right, in 2012, we had 43 million seniors, 43 million people who were 65 and older. That was 13% of the population. We also had 5.9 million people who were 85 and older. By 2030, it's anticipated that we'll have at least 72 million seniors, and that will be 20% of the population. So it's going to jump from 13% to 20%. Why? Because of the baby boomers. They began turning 65 in 2011. Baby boomers are defined as people born between 1946 and 1964. I was extremely upset when I saw that 1964 year. I thought I was Generation X or Y or one of those cool generations. I'm the last year of the baby boomers. So now I have to say we baby boomers, but so it goes. By 2050, we will have 19 million people who are 85 and older. Life expectancy in 2012, on average, was 76.4 years for males and 81.2 years for females. But those are averages. It turns out that if you are 65 or older, you actually have a much longer life expectancy. That is because you've survived the hazards of infancy and childhood and being a teenager. So everyone in this room has decades ahead. Alzheimer's, can't ignore that. In 2012, we had 5.4 million people living with an Alzheimer's diagnosis. Alzheimer's is just one form of dementia. There are many people living with other forms of dementia. And of interest to me, in 2012, 16.1% of women between the ages of 40 and 50 had not had children. So that is not an insignificant part of the population, and we do need to think about that because they are far less likely to have unpaid caregivers. All right, the law. So how do we do in this country with legal preparedness, with having our legal documents in place? Not very well. 41% of baby boomers do not have wills. That includes people who are highly educated, people in their 70s, people who have illnesses already. They just don't get their documents done. There's another type of document called an advance directive, which has to do with medical care. Only 16 to 36% of people have that, so only a small fraction, and it's very important. I'll tell you why. Well, first of all, do you need a will? Yes, you need a will. If you don't have a will, state law will govern how your assets are distributed. And they will go to your children and your legally married spouse. And for some people, that's okay. But if there are other things that you want to do with your money, such as leave it to nieces, nephews, siblings, other loved ones who are not your children or your spouse, or leave some of it to charity, like Case Western Reserve University, that will not happen without a will. You do need a will if you have instructions and you want them followed. If you have a lot of money, you are advised to go talk to a lawyer and think about a trust. There are a variety of advantages, one of which is it will not have to go through probate, so it's a lot easier for the people who will inherit. There's another tool called payment on death or transfer on death. Anybody hear of that? Okay, good, a few people. So that allows you to actually designate assets as going directly to a beneficiary that you name on a form upon your death. So again, it doesn't have to go to court. It doesn't have to go to probate. And having done this research, I actually did that, and it's pretty easy. So if you want that for your car, you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. You want that with bank accounts, you go to the bank. It's a simple form. You want that with your house, you go to the deed people downtown. But after that, it doesn't have to go through probate, and it might give you some peace of mind. So you don't only need a will, you also need a decision maker who can take over if you become decisionally incapacitated, which might happen because of dementia or because of traumatic brain injury or some other illness or condition that prevents you from being able to make your own decisions. You need somebody who can write checks for you, who can decide if some property should be sold in order to pay for your care, who can keep your finances going. So this needs to be someone that you trust, that you are willing to talk to about your finances. You're willing to tell them where your important documents are and how they can get their hands on your assets if they need to. This was illustrated to me by the story of a colleague of mine at work. So her parents were in their 80s and they were aging in place in their home. The mother had dementia, didn't really understand anything about finances, but the father was one of these super private, super autonomous people. And when the adult children asked him about his finances, he would say, "It's none of your business. Leave me alone. I'm in control. Don't ever ask that again." Well, one day there was a catastrophic fire in the house. It burnt to ashes. The papers were gone. The computer was gone. The mother survived, but she has dementia, doesn't know anything about finances. The father died of his wounds. And to this day, almost a year later, the adult children are still struggling to figure out what bank accounts were there, what insurance policies were there, how do they pay for their mother's care. This is a huge tragedy, and it shouldn't happen to anyone. People should be able to access your resources if they need to. And we always advise you should have an original decision maker, but you should also name an alternate in case your original decision maker is herself incapacitated when the time comes. I also always advise provide funeral instructions. A lot of people tell me, I don't want to be demanding, I don't want to give details to my children and make them feel burdened. Let them just do what they will. That is not a kindness. That is a bad idea, because it's a very stressful and traumatic time when a parent dies. Hopefully they'll be really upset. And when they're really upset, the last thing they want is to try to figure out from scratch what you would have wanted. How do they honor you? What cemetery to go to? What funeral arrangements? The more details you provide, the better, actually. They will appreciate it. They will still find things to argue about, I learned, but at least you minimize it. So you don't only need to worry about finances, you need to worry about health care. So you need a durable power of attorney for property and finances. You also need a durable power of attorney for health care. You need someone who can make decisions for you, who can consent to your care or decide this isn't something you would have wanted and not consent to it. And this should be someone who you trust, who you've talked to about your priorities and your beliefs and your preferences. Would you want a ventilator at the end of life? Would you want artificial nutrition and hydration? Would you want to emphasize prolonging life at all costs? Or might you want to emphasize quality of life, even if it means you will have a shorter lifespan? What are your preferences? What are your beliefs? And in fact, if you don't have a decision maker, it is possible that there are certain types of care that you won't be able to get. You will get emergency care and end-of-life care. But I sit on the ethics committee of university hospitals in University Circle, and I remember one case where an elderly man came to the hospital with his daughter, his adult daughter, and he needed some kidney stones removed, a particular procedure. He was in tremendous pain. And the doctors talked to him, and they decided he wasn't able to make his own decisions. He was confused, he seemed sort of out of it. So the adult daughter said, yes, well, I'm here, I consent to this treatment, he's in a lot of pain, go to it. And they said, that's great, where is your durable power of attorney for health care? And she said, well, he doesn't have that, we didn't do that. The doctors sent him home. They refused to do the procedure because they were afraid that if something went wrong, and it ended up in court, they would not be able to show that they got legitimate consent from someone who is legally authorized to provide it and who understood the risks. So very important to have a durable power of attorney for. There are other documents, we can talk about them in question and answer. They are in the book, but I'm trying to restrain myself in talking about the law. So just one other point. It's not good enough to have these documents. You also have to revisit them. You have to update them. If you move to another state, you need new documents because they're all governed by state law. They vary from state to state. If somebody important dies, you need to update. Maybe your decision maker died, maybe someone important in the will died, update. If you got a divorce, you probably don't want your ex as your decision maker. So don't forget about these. All right, let's switch to medical care. I guess we all hope that we will die in our sleep and just not be aware of what happens and not suffer for even a minute. So sort of like Justice Scalia, maybe. So I had a very good research assistant, and I asked her to go do some research and figure out how often that happens. This was one of the most depressing figures that I discovered during my research. Only 7 to 15% of people die a sudden death. A sudden death is defined as a death that is not explained by anything in the medical record. So a stroke that comes out of nowhere, a heart attack, a car accident. So actually, Justice Scalia didn't have a sudden death because he had health problems for a long time. So most of us are going to, unfortunately, have a period of decline. 45% of people who are 65 and over have 2 or more chronic conditions. So what do? We run to specialists. And in Cleveland, you can get really good care from specialists. We have the Cleveland Clinic, university hospitals. The average senior has 4 specialists. The risk is that your care becomes fragmented, that nobody coordinates your care, oversees it. And so you can get drug-drug interactions. You can get one condition treated aggressively to the detriment of other conditions. You can have aggressive treatment that actually causes your mental state to deteriorate. And I saw this directly with my mother. About a year before she died, my mother, within 2 days, went from being a frail but fully lucid 83-year-old to being as though she had advanced Alzheimer's. In 2 days. She lost interest in eating, she stopped communicating, she slept most of the day. When she was awake, she sat in front of the television with a blank stare. We were horrified. And what it turned out to be was a drug-drug interaction. She was on 12 drugs. Why an 83-year-old who weighs 104 pounds would be on 12 drugs? I don't know. But she was. She had a lot of doctors. And then they added a 13th. And it was a very unlucky 13th. It made her completely and dramatically lose her cognition, her mental capacities. And so my sisters and I did a bunch of research, talked to everyone we could think of who knew anything about medicine, and actually without her doctor's cooperation, we took away drugs. Every doctor thought his drugs were critical and you can't touch them. But we did it. We got her down from 12 drugs to 5 essential life-saving drugs. And she lived for another 9 or 10 months. She regained her cognitive capacities. But there were 2 months that she completely didn't remember. She had no idea of anything that happened during those 2 months. We would tell her stories, she couldn't believe it. So this can happen, and I have since read and heard other accounts of similar instances, so it's a real danger. So you need coordinated care. Who can give you coordinated care? A geriatrician. But we don't have a lot of geriatricians. In 2013, there were 7,300 geriatricians to treat 43 million seniors. And in fact, I just got my AARP magazine, and they had an article about that. I got that AARP card weeks before my birthday. I was like, take it away, not yet. But anyway, the experts say that we will need 36,000 new geriatricians by 2030. That is not going to happen. It is not an appealing specialty for medical students. They want to be dermatologists and anesthesiologists and live the good life. So if you know people who are going to medical school, urge them to become geriatricians, but they may not think that's the best idea. So a primary care physician might be able to serve this coordinating function, oversee your care. But do primary care physicians have a lot of time to study your drug lists and keep track of every single thing that's happening to you? No, we live in a world where they have 10 or 15 minutes per visit, if you're lucky. So it's a real challenge. And one piece of advice that I have is learn to become an active member of your own medical team. What does that mean? Well, do some research about your conditions. Do some research before you go to the doctor. How can you do research? The internet is not a bad source, actually. You have to be careful. You have to be skeptical. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that is garbage. But there are also a lot of good sources, government sources, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the National Institutes of Health, a variety of prestigious professional organizations, such as the American Medical Association, the Michael J. Fox Parkinson's Association. So there are a lot of good sources. Now you have to understand the limitations of your research, right? It's very educating, but don't decide that you have a brain tumor before any doctor has looked at you. And don't decide that you need this treatment and not other treatments before you've talked to the doctor. But do formulate questions and feel empowered to ask questions when you go to the doctor. About a year ago, I accompanied my husband to his Parkinson's doctor. And the Parkinson's doctors always love to give you cocktails, drug cocktails. Try a little of this, try a little of that. So he was pushing a new drug to add to the cocktail. And I was listening, and I noticed that he wasn't saying anything about side effects. And so I asked, what about side effects? And he said dismissively, most people tolerate this drug beautifully. And I said, that's wonderful. What about those that don't? And the doctor finally said, well, 20% of people find that it dulls their mind. And this was soon after that experience with my mother. So my husband is still working. He's working as a computer science professor. We could not take a 1 in 5 chance that some medicine would dull his mind. So we said, no, thank you. But we wouldn't have had that information if I hadn't asked the question. So now my husband a couple of times has gone on his own because it conflicted with my teaching schedule, and he comes back and he says, boy, the doctor was in a good mood this afternoon. You weren't there. So nevertheless, you should not go to important medical appointments by yourself. You should involve trusted advocates. Go with someone if it's an important medical appointment, if it's a procedure, if it's a hospitalization. You have to have someone who will help you ask questions, who will listen to the doctor, who will take notes maybe, who will be able to talk to you afterwards about what happened and what was said. And again, people tell me I don't want to burden others. It's boring, it's stressful, nobody wants to go with you to the doctor. Well, you shouldn't feel that way, because you'll have plenty of opportunities to reciprocate. And I learned that very early in life. When I was 29, I became very ill, and I needed very major surgery. And I was single, living in Houston in a 1-bedroom apartment. My mother had to come from Michigan and take care of me for a few weeks and get me through that. And I felt bad. It disrupted her life, but she was my mother, so I didn't feel that bad. Well, less than 6 months later, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she announced, I don't remember a discussion, I remember an announcement. She announced that there was no way she was going to be treated in East Lansing, Michigan. She wanted to be treated at the renowned MD Anderson Cancer Center, which was conveniently located in where she had a daughter. And so she ended up moving into my 1-bedroom apartment for what turned out to be 9 months. So bingo, I had an opportunity to reciprocate many times over right away. It actually turned out to be a wonderful period of our lives. We got to know each other in ways that we hadn't before when she was up to it. We went out, we had fun, we socialized, and we were really grateful to have those many months together. So it can actually be a wonderful experience. And this brings me sort of full circle. So it's very important to become an active member of your own medical team, but you also have to have adequate support systems. You have to involve others. You have to have a decision maker. You have to be willing and able to talk to people about what you would want. Do you prioritize prolonging life? Do you prioritize quality of life? Do you want different kinds of treatment if you have dementia or don't have dementia? Do you have religious beliefs that might inform these decisions? You have to think ahead, you have to plan ahead, you have to talk to people. In the midst of crisis, it's too late. In the midst of crisis, it's extremely difficult to make good decisions if you don't know anything about the problems that you are facing. So I think I'm going to stop here. How long have I? Yeah, I talked for a while. And I'd love to take questions, comments, have a discussion for a while. So I think we're going to use the mic.
And this is a comment in regards to driving for the elderly. My mom had Alzheimer's, and I don't know the gentleman's name, but he's a retired Ohio State trooper that has started a business that goes out. You'll request him, he'll come out and evaluate that individual. So do you know this? There is a fee.
I don't know about this gentleman, but there are actually organizations, I think the Veterans Administration, university hospitals, a few of them will do an assessment if you can get your loved one to agree to that.
Right, and there is a fee for it, but at least you're not the one that's taking it upon yourself to say you can't drive anymore. So I just thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah, that's great. So you don't remember his name?
No, he's a retired Ohio trooper, I'm sure if you look up.
And he'll actually come to the home to do that. Okay, good to know.
You're an attorney, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see clients privately?
I do not, and I am not licensed in Ohio. So I can tell you of people I know, but no, I don't practice at this point.
You said that you should revisit your will and all those things, those other things, every 5 years. But when I talked to my attorney, she said that the way she wrote it, it would be good for forever. That's what I understood.
Yes, I don't mean that you have to rewrite them every 5 years. You just have to think about them and ask yourself, is it still all a good fit for me? Did I get a divorce and I need to change my decision maker? Do I want to change my will? So you don't need to rewrite them. You just need to think about them and make sure they're updated. So thank you for that clarification. Yeah. Well, we're doing the mic.
Any suggestions on how to approach long-term care? I've started that and it's overwhelming, the information.
Long-term care insurance or long-term care insurance? So my advice, and I do have a discussion in the book that's somewhat detailed, but the basic advice is to go to a financial advisor. It's extremely expensive. Most of these policies cost thousands of dollars per year. So if you don't have a lot of money, the experts say it's not a great investment because if you need it, you'll spend down your money and you'll become Medicaid eligible, and then the government will pay for long-term care in a nursing home. If you have a lot of money, it's not a good investment because just save your money, invest it, it will grow, and then you'll hopefully have enough money for long-term care. And if you don't need long-term care, you haven't thrown out, tens of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. There's a slice of people in the middle for whom it can be very useful and important. There are also now some hybrid products that are combinations of life insurance and long-term care insurance, and those are worth exploring. Some of them you have to put down as an initial premium $40,000 to $50,000, but then you never have to pay again. So it's extremely complicated. Read the chapter, but go to a financial advisor. Otherwise, it's easy to make a mistake.
A number of the states have end-of-life options for an individual to choose to end their lives. Why is it so difficult for the country as a whole to come to this kind of a situation for us?
So you mean assisted suicide? Yeah. Assisted suicide, there are 6 states, I think, now where that's legal, so it's a small minority. It's just a very politically controversial issue, and, you know, we're cutting back on abortion in many states, so we're not in a progressive mood, sadly. I think as the baby boomers get older, there may be more political pressure to consider that and to adopt that, but it's been very, very difficult in a lot of states. You know, people think, oh, there are going to be death panels and the elderly are going to be given pills and instructed to take them because we don't want to spend resources on them, et cetera, et cetera. But for a lot of people, that is a great comfort. And in fact, the reports from those states show that a very small number of people ask for the drug prescriptions, maybe 100 and some. And a lot of those people have them but never take the prescription. They just feel comforted knowing they have that option in their hand, and instead they die of natural causes before they choose to take the drugs. So it's certainly not an issue where thousands and thousands of people will be pressured to end their lives, but it's very politically difficult.
Yeah, I was curious if you had done any research or visiting about these village communities, and if you had any thoughts about those versus, just a senior 55-plus community. Pros and cons.
Right. So village communities, that's another form of having some community support. That's sort of an emerging trend. Actually, at a different talk, somebody told me at Fairmount Temple that he's trying to start a village community somewhere here in the Cleveland area. Those are communities where I believe people age in place. They stay in their homes, and there's sort of a loose organization that provides support. So they pay some fees, and they may get transportation, they may get cleaning services, they may get some social opportunities, organized lectures or parties somewhere. So that's certainly cheaper than picking up and moving to a retirement community for many people, but you're still aging in place, so it's less support than you would get in other settings. And if your home is unsafe or you're at risk of fainting or falling or whatever, the village organization may not be enough help for you.
Sure, I have a question. If you have a power of attorney or a healthcare proxy, but the older relative is not been totally diagnosed as, having dementia or Alzheimer's, but you suspect something's there, or there's some signs or difficulties, what do you do?
Right. So the best thing is to have their doctor, primary care physician, or whoever give you a letter that says they are not decisionally capable anymore. And then you can take that and everyone will respect that. But it comes into play in situations such as that which I described, where a doctor is actually trying to obtain consent, and the treating physician in different settings may decide themselves that the person is not capable, and then you can't get the treatment unless you have that durable power of attorney. So a lot of times the healthcare providers will say, no, can't give consent, show us your durable power of attorney. But with my father, we actually got his primary care physician to write a letter, and then we could take it to the banks for financial purposes, and we could take it to other medical providers.
So you're with UH, correct?
I'm with Case Western.
Oh,
but
okay. Well, UH has a system now where, and all my dad's doctors are UH, on the computer. You know, everybody enters
Electronic
everything into the
health
computer.
record.
I'm sorry?
An electronic health record.
Yeah. Do you have an opinion of that? Because it seems, in my opinion, that it's working really well for my dad because the doctors do see the medications and so on and so forth. But that's pretty new within about the past year or so.
Right. So that's a whole different story. Electronic health records, they're here to stay. So everyone has electronic health records, in large part because the Obama administration has been very enthusiastic about it and has offered people financial incentives to adopt them, and actually Medicare now docks doctors who don't have electronic health records. There are pluses and minuses. So for a lot of people it works well. The doctors can easily see the medication lists and so on. There are a lot of errors because healthcare providers are typing quickly. They can introduce errors. A lot of them are not adept at navigating the electronic health record. I've actually sat and where the doctor wasn't paying attention to me, he was cursing the computer. That doesn't make you feel good during an appointment. It's new. People are still very much adjusting, but it's absolutely the wave of the future, and there's no going back from it. And in fact, the medical profession is the last to computerize. The rest of the world computerized a long time ago. So a lot of people said, Mazel tov, you know, where have you been all these years or decades? One thing to keep in mind with your documents is that you need to make sure people have them, including your doctor. So if you have a decision maker, a durable power of attorney, or you have a living will, which actually provides instructions as to what care you would want at the very end of life if you're unconscious or in a vegetative state, you have to make sure you gave that to the doctor. And I had an experience in the fall. I went for my physical, and he asked, you know, do you have a living will? Do you have a decision maker? And I said, yes, yes. And he checked the box, and then he went on to, do you have acid reflux or whatever? And I said, wait a second, do you have copies of those documents? And he said, oh, come to think of it, no. And I said, so what good is it for you to check the box that I have? You don't know what they say. So I went and I went home, I got it, they scanned it in. One problem with the electronic health record is at UH, they don't have an alert on the record saying that you have these things. So they might scan it in and then it goes into a black hole of scanned documents, never to be retrieved again. So you really have to, if you're going for surgery, you have to take them again and hand it to them. And you really have to be pretty proactive in making sure people know what to do.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
That's all very good that your primary care physician has all this information, but the way hospitalization works these days, apparently your primary care physician does not see you in the hospital. You have a hospital list, right?
That is correct.
And I have a lot of problems with that new system, and I'm just wondering how it gets coordinated with all of your, I mean, I assume they have access to your computerized medical history, but to me, somehow the coordination doesn't sound as if it would be as good.
Right. So the idea behind these electronic health records is that they'll be interoperable and that the doctors in the hospital will be able to see all of the information from your primary care physician and specialists. It would all be coordinated. In reality, that is not necessarily so, especially if you have doctors in different networks. So the material from Cleveland Clinic is not interoperable with the UH system. So we're still not there. There's a lot of room for improvement with the technology. But you're right that we no longer have the primary care physician coming to the hospital and being your doctor, and that's a little bit sad. So you do have to be proactive, and if you have documents, if you have decision makers, you do have to remind your caregivers of that, because it's not necessarily true that they will know that automatically just because you gave it to your primary care physician. The same is true about your allergies and your medications. There can be a lot of errors in your records. So if you have something that's important, you want to ask them, do you know this? Is it correct in my record? I have looked at my electronic health record, and I have been horrified because surgeries that I had are not there. Surgeries that I haven't had are there. I don't know who had those surgeries, but they're in my record. And I've asked for corrections, and they haven't necessarily happened. So it is problematic. You have to be an active member of your own medical team. Right, so the comment is that some hospitals allow doctors to come and visit you and some hospitals don't, but we're very much shifting to a system of hospital lists, so even if the hospital will allow your doctor to come, it doesn't mean your doctor will come, because they may not be able to bill enough to justify visiting you. They may be very busy, so you're not guaranteed to have your doctor come and treat you at any given hospital.
Is there an app that you could have that would have your durable power of attorney and your drug list and whatever else you need, so you always have it with you? Because otherwise, you have to carry these documents along whenever you go to the doctor or the hospital.
Right. So in some states, and I think Ohio is among them, there are registries of people that have healthcare power of attorneys and living wills and so on. So you can register with the state, and ideally the state alerts the hospital that you have that. We have cards that we give at UH. We give people cards. So I think on the internet you can download these too. Cards that you can keep in your wallet that show that you have a durable power of attorney for healthcare and a living will. Your medication list, you should have that in your wallet or in your purse, because you never know when you will need it. And it's a very good idea to have a copy of that with you. Well, yes, but it will say my durable power of attorney is my son Joe, and then the hospital will contact your son Joe. So, and they actually, well, at least at University Hospital, they are very, very conscious about chasing down decision makers if the patient cannot make decisions for him or herself, because it's in their interest to have the right person making the decisions, and then there's no conflict and no problem afterwards.
So my husband's a family doctor and has been so for almost 30 years, and I've heard all the stories. And so let me just say, for you, if God forbid you have to go to the hospital and your personal doctor can't go, would be better to know who your doctor likes to use in the hospital situation. And if you can plan, let's say it's a planned thing, then have that conversation in advance with your own private care doctor. And if it's an emergent thing, make sure you have a relative or friend that you trust who can speak for you when you can't speak. It's because it's not so much, the problem becomes not, obviously something happened to you and that's the problem. But the problem is stuff gets screwed up in the hospital like, whoa. It doesn't take anything for something stupid to happen. And the fact of the matter is if you have a physician who uses, like I use this guy because he's great, and my outcomes are always great when I use that guy or girl. And so make sure that your patient representative knows that the right people that you're being treated with the right people. Because if you just happen to go on a Tuesday and it's a holiday Tuesday and everybody's out of town, or it's in the middle of July and nobody's there, you're going to have an outcome that may not be what you're hoping for because stuff happens. So that's one thing. And then another thing is, I don't care how many power of attorneys you have, stuff gets messed up because the families are uncoordinated. I cannot tell you how many stories my husband comes home with that the parent did the right thing and they got it all in line. And then some kid of the family who hasn't talked to the parent, and whatever the reason is, comes in because mom or dad is laying there, and all of a sudden they had this lovely plan, and the child is like, no, don't do that. And the hospital and the doctors don't know what to do because, yeah, you got the plan, but you also got this child who is causing ruckus because they didn't, whatever the family issue was, and they don't want mom and dad to die. So that's
Right.
a whole nother.
So there are a lot of, it is true, there are a
I'm
lot of
just telling
family conflicts, even if you have the documents. But a good hospital, if you get the documents into their hands, a good conscientious hospital, first of all, they all have general counsel offices now. So they will go to the attorney's office and they will ask, what should we do? And the attorney's office will tell them you have to follow the patient's written instructions. And if there is an uncooperative child who is freaking out or whatever, you do not defer to that child because this other child or sister or partner or whoever is the legal decision maker. So that's another reason why it's so important to have this settled legally, because that provides instructions. And then, yes, when the family falls apart, which often they do, you at least know who to prioritize and who to defer to.
The hospitals do not necessarily cooperate. Last year, I took my husband to Ahuja. We told them who his primary doctor was. My husband died. I went to see his primary doctor because I didn't hear from him. Not only did he not know he died, they never told him that he was in the hospital.
Right.
And that was university at Ahuja.
That's a different issue. That's the issue of
terrible.
whether they involve your primary care physician. That's different
But they
from
were
decision maker. And we do have a real problem that the hospitals operate with hospitalists, and your primary care physician often does not have a role. We've just shifted the way we do hospital care, and that can be to the detriment of the patient, because someone who doesn't know the patient and who's just coming for this one isolated visit.
But they were supposed to tell him. I mean, they said, this is the rule. And I was screaming at them every day.
I think we had, yeah.
Explain again how, if you decide to age in place, it becomes isolating? Or could become
right.
isolating?
It can become isolating if you can't drive anymore, so you can't get out. If your friends are elderly and frail or dying and they can't come visit you. And if you don't have family nearby who's going to be running back and forth to see you. So I've known many, many cases, including my mother-in-law. She insisted on staying in her home till 93. She had cancer. She didn't want help. She couldn't go out anymore, and she spent a whole lot of time. She was in Massachusetts. We were here. She spent a tremendous amount of time all by herself, suffering a lot with nobody visiting her, and she would have probably been better at a retirement community where it was apartments and people can walk down the hall and there's staff that checks on you and so on.
So along the line of the hospitalists in the hospital, I would also recommend that individuals know which hospital system they want to go to. So if an ambulance comes, they take them to the right system. Because if you belong to a different system, your record doesn't exist. And
Right.
it needs to be done, at the time that they come and pick them up.
Okay. Right. One more. Okay.
Given this problem in terms of the primary care physicians not being the ones consulted by the hospital, if you are concerned and contact your primary care surgeon under the circumstances and say to him, would you please talk to these people at the hospital who are providing care, does that primary care physician have any standing and any actual influence on what happens?
Right, so one thing is, does the primary care physician have privileges at that hospital? Is he within the same system as the hospital? So if he is and he does, then you're better off. And then it just depends on the way this hospital system is set up. Do they defer to doctors who know the patient, or are they completely focused on their hospitalists? So it's not clear, and it's sort of a case-by-case determination. And you shouldn't count on having the primary care physician that you've had for 30 years involved in your hospital care, unfortunately. Used to be, but we've shifted.
I want to thank you for a very useful, provocative, educational talk for all of us. And please come by and read the book. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.